June 2nd, 2015. A roller coaster loaded with passengers barrels at 50 miles per hour directly into an empty test car stalled on the track ahead. The collision crushes riders in the front row. Two teenagers lose their legs. It's all on camera, and this is just the beginning. Accident 1. The Sandblaster derailment. Melissa Collins, a mother of 2 young children, was on her last day of vacation in Daytona Beach, Florida, when she decided to ride the Sandblaster roller coaster with a friend for one final thrill before heading home to her family and returning to normal life after a week of relaxation and fun at the beach. Moments leading up to the accident, Melissa had a terrible feeling in her gut that something wasn't right about the ride's movement and speed. She later told reporters that as they came around the corner, she knew they weren't going to make that turn properly, and that something was about to go horribly wrong. But by that point, there was nothing she could do to stop what was about to happen. The Sandblaster suddenly derailed and crashed, leaving Melissa trapped and dangling 3 stories above the ground, hanging on for dear life while emergency responders scrambled to figure out how to safely extract her and the other passengers from the mangled wreckage. 2 passengers were actually ejected from the ride entirely during the crash and fell to the ground below, suffering catastrophic injuries from the impact with the pavement. When Melissa was finally rescued and brought to the hospital, doctors discovered the extent of her injuries was far worse than anyone initially realized. She had suffered a fractured jaw, a broken arm, a broken collarbone, crushed ribs, and severe spinal injuries that would require extensive surgery and months of painful rehabilitation. Melissa is still in excruciating pain years later and deals with chronic issues from the spinal damage that will affect her for the rest of her life. What makes this accident even more disturbing is that it happened recently and could have happened to absolutely anybody who decided to ride the Sandblaster that day, which means there was no warning, no obvious sign that the ride was unsafe, and no reason for Melissa to believe she was putting her life in danger by boarding what appeared to be a normal functioning attraction. The investigation into what caused the derailment revealed maintenance failures and inspection oversights that should have caught the mechanical problems before the ride was ever allowed to operate with passengers aboard. Accident 2. The Flying Dinosaur stuck upside down. The Flying Dinosaur ride at Universal Studios Japan is designed to simulate the experience of being carried through the air by a prehistoric creature, suspending riders face down beneath the track as they soar through loops and inversions at high speeds. But on one terrifying day, the simulation became a nightmare that passengers would never forget. More than 60 thrill-seekers had to be rescued from the ride after it malfunctioned and stopped functioning completely, leaving them hanging upside down for hours with all the blood in their bodies flowing directly to their heads, creating intense pressure, dizziness, nausea, and the very real fear that their restraints might fail while they were suspended 60 to 90 feet above the ground with nothing but concrete below them. One passenger was left hanging upside down for more than 2 hours straight, which is an extraordinarily dangerous amount of time to remain inverted because the human body is not designed to sustain that position for extended periods. And medical experts warn that prolonged inversion can cause serious health complications, including stroke, brain damage, and death if blood pools in the head for too long without relief. Rescue teams had to carefully approach each rider individually and figure out how to safely lower them from their positions without causing the entire ride structure to shift or the restraints to release prematurely, which meant the rescue operation took several agonizing hours to complete while passengers hung there, experiencing increasing pain, panic, and the terrible thought that they might not make it out alive. Miraculously, no one was seriously injured during the incident or the rescue operation, but the psychological trauma of being stuck upside down for hours is something that likely haunts those passengers to this day. And it's safe to assume that none of them ever rode the Flying Dinosaur again, or any similar ride that suspends passengers in inverted positions. Accident 3. The water ride derailment. Chain reaction. The footage of this accident is absolutely terrifying because it shows not just one disaster but a cascading series of disasters that kept getting worse as the situation spiraled completely out of control. And the scariest part is that riders themselves had to try to prevent further catastrophe, while park operators failed to realize what was happening. Everything appears normal in the video at first. You can see a boat successfully completing the big drop at the end of the water ride and splashing down into the pool at the bottom, which is exactly how the ride is supposed to work. But after the drop, someone kept filming, and that's when the true horror of the situation becomes apparent because the ride had actually derailed at the bottom of the drop, and the boat wasn't sitting on the track where it should have been. Everyone on board was able to scramble out of the derailed boat and onto the platform, but here's the absolutely terrifying part that makes this accident so much worse than a simple derailment. The ride was still very much active, which meant the next group of people were about to come down that big drop at high speed and slam directly into the derailed boat and the passengers who were still trying to evacuate the area. One of the people who had just gotten off the derailed boat suddenly realized the terrible situation they were all in and understood that the next boat was going to come crashing down any second. So they tried frantically to run out of the way and warn the incoming riders, but there wasn't enough time to get everyone to safety before the second boat came barreling down. The second boat slammed into the first derailed boat with tremendous force, and the passengers in that boat were injured from the unexpected collision that they had no way to prepare for or avoid. But now the situation is even worse, because everyone in the second boat is stuck in the same position as the first group. They're sitting ducks waiting to be hit by the third boat that's already making its way through the ride toward that same drop. This created a horrifying chain reaction, where each incoming boat would crash into the pile of derailed boats at the bottom, injuring more riders and trapping more people in the danger zone. And this cycle was going to continue indefinitely until the ride operators finally realized what was happening and shut down the entire system to stop more boats from being dispatched. The video is incredibly frightening to watch because you can see people desperately trying to escape before the next impact, while others are trapped and helpless, knowing they're about to be hit. Accident 4. The Mindbender Mall Disaster. In 1986, the Mindbender roller coaster inside West Edmonton Mall in Alberta, Canada, experienced what remains one of the most shocking indoor amusement park disasters in history. And the fact that this triple-loop roller coaster was operating inside a shopping mall makes the tragedy even more surreal and disturbing. West Edmonton Mall is absolutely massive, so large that it contains its own full-sized amusement park, complete with multiple roller coasters, water rides, and other attractions all housed entirely indoors. Which means shoppers walking through the mall could watch riders screaming through loops and drops while they browsed stores or ate lunch at the food court. On the day of the accident, the Mindbender was traveling at extremely high speed as it approached its third loop when something went catastrophically wrong with the ride's mechanics. The coaster train went so fast around the corner that it actually derailed as it entered the loop, and instead of completing the inversion as designed, the cars stalled at the top of the loop and then rolled backward, slamming directly into a concrete support column with devastating force. 3 people were killed instantly from the impact, and 15 others suffered serious injuries, ranging from broken bones and internal trauma to severe head injuries that required emergency surgery. Investigators who examined the wreckage determined that missing bolts in a wheel assembly had caused the derailment, which meant this was absolutely a preventable accident caused by human error during maintenance. The fact that critical bolts were simply missing from a wheel assembly on a roller coaster carrying human passengers is absolutely inexcusable and represents a catastrophic failure of the inspection and maintenance protocols that are people, supposed to catch exactly this type of mechanical problem before it becomes fatal. The ride was closed for several months following the accident, while investigators completed their work and the mall made repairs and safety upgrades. Then, incredibly, the Mindbender was reopened to the public and has continued operating inside West Edmonton Mall ever since. Though it's impossible to imagine that anyone who witnessed the 1986 accident or lost a loved one that day would ever want to see that ride running again. Fortunately, since that terrible accident, nothing similar has occurred on the Mindbender, but the memory of that day remains a dark chapter in the mall's history. Accident 5. The Alton Towers Smiler Crash. June 2nd, 2015. Vicky Balch and Leah Washington didn't know each other before that day. But their lives would become forever connected by the devastating roller coaster accident at Alton Towers theme park in England that would change both of them forever when they were just 20 and 17 years old respectively. Both young women were riding the Smiler, a steel roller coaster that holds the world record for most inversions, with 14 loops packed into a single terrifying ride experience, and they were seated in the front row of the train along with their friends Joe Pugh and Daniel Thorpe when the accident occurred. What happened that day was the result of catastrophic human error by ride operators who made a decision that directly violated every safety protocol designed to protect passengers. An empty test car had stalled on the track ahead due to a computer malfunction, and the ride's safety system correctly detected this obstruction and prevented the loaded passenger train from being dispatched. However, ride operators were under pressure to keep the ride running and minimize delays because every minute the ride sat idle meant lost revenue and frustrated guests waiting in the queue. So they made the decision to manually override the safety system and send the fully loaded train around the track without physically verifying that the obstruction had been cleared. The loaded train carrying Vicky, Leah, Joe, Daniel, and 12 other passengers accelerated to approximately 50 miles per hour as it barreled around the track, and when it came around the corner, it slammed directly into the stationary empty test car with absolutely devastating force that crushed everyone seated in the front row. The impact was so violent that Vicky's legs were destroyed beyond any hope of surgical repair. Leah's legs were mangled with massive trauma to bones, muscles, and blood vessels. Joe's kneecaps were completely shattered, and Daniel suffered serious injuries as well. It took rescuers more than 3 hours to carefully extract all 16 passengers from the tangled wreckage, while Leah was bleeding so heavily that the air ambulance had to fly in emergency blood supplies and perform a transfusion rite there at the crash site to keep her alive. Vicky was rushed to the hospital where surgeons fought desperately to save her legs, but the damage was simply too extensive, and she ultimately had to undergo a through-knee amputation that left her permanently disabled at age 20. Leah's left leg was amputated above the knee, and her right knee required extensive reconstructive surgery that involved multiple operations over many months of agonizing recovery. Both young women now have to use prosthetic legs for everyday activities that they once took for granted, and they've had to completely rebuild their lives around their disabilities while dealing with the psychological trauma of remembering that terrible day when everything changed in an instant. Joe's shattered kneecaps required multiple surgeries and left him with permanent mobility limitations that affect his ability to walk, run, or participate in physical activities. The investigation revealed that ride operators had received clear safety warnings that the track wasn't clear, but they chose to override those warnings and prioritize keeping the ride operational over passenger safety, which is exactly the type of decision that should never be made under any circumstances. Merlin Entertainments, which owns Alton Towers, pleaded guilty to safety violations and was fined a record £5 million, and the company paid millions more in settlements to Vicky, Leah, Joe, and the other victims. The Smiler was eventually reopened with additional safety features designed to prevent manual overrides of safety systems. But for Vicky and Leah, those improvements came far too late to prevent the life-altering injuries that they will carry with them forever. Accident 6. The Big Thunder Mountain Railroad Tragedies. Disneyland's Big Thunder Mountain Railroad is supposed to be one of the safer, more family-friendly attractions in the park. A runaway mine train roller coaster that provides mild thrills without the extreme speeds or inversions of more intense rides. But the history of accidents on this attraction proves that even rides designed for families can turn deadly when things go wrong. In 1998, a 5-year-old boy was riding Big Thunder Mountain Railroad when his foot somehow became wedged between the passenger cars during the ride, and when the train continued moving, his foot was crushed with such force that it caused catastrophic damage to the bones, muscles, and blood vessels. The ride was stopped immediately, and emergency responders worked to free the child, but the injuries were so severe that doctors had to amputate all of his toes on his left foot to save him from infection and further complications. The fact that a young child could get his foot wedged between cars on a Disney attraction raises serious questions about the design of the ride vehicles and whether proper safety gaps were maintained between cars to prevent exactly this type of injury from occurring in the first place. But the accidents on Big Thunder Mountain Railroad didn't stop there in 2003. The same ride experienced an even more catastrophic failure that would claim a life and expose serious maintenance problems that had been ignored for far too long. A 22-year-old man was riding the attraction when the train suddenly derailed while traveling at speed through one of the ride's many curves and drops. The derailment caused the passenger cars to violently jerk and slam against the track structure, and the young man suffered severe blunt force trauma and extensive internal bleeding from being thrown against the restraints and the sides of the car during the accident. He was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, but despite the efforts of trauma surgeons, he died from his injuries, making him the first guest to die on a Disneyland attraction in over a decade. 10 other riders were also injured in the derailment, suffering from broken bones, concussions, and soft tissue injuries that required hospitalization and treatment. The investigation into the derailment revealed that improper maintenance was the root cause of the accident. Critical components of the ride's wheel assemblies and track connections had not been properly inspected or maintained, which allowed wear and fatigue to accumulate until the system failed catastrophically with a train full of passengers aboard. Disney was forced to shut down Big Thunder Mountain Railroad for an extended period while comprehensive repairs and safety upgrades were completed, and the company implemented new maintenance protocols across all of its theme parks to try to prevent similar accidents from happening in the future. But for the family of the young man who died and the child who lost his toes, those changes came too late to prevent the tragedies that altered their lives forever. These 6 accidents prove that theme park disasters aren't just theoretical possibilities or rare freak occurrences. They're real events that have been captured on camera and resulted in deaths, amputations, and life-changing injuries to people who were simply trying to enjoy a day of fun with their families and friends. Melissa Collins is still in pain from her spinal injuries. Vicky Balch and Leah Washington will use prosthetic legs for the rest of their lives. A 22-year-old man never came home from Disneyland. Every single one of these tragedies was preventable through proper maintenance, adequate inspections, and operators who prioritize safety over profits and convenience. The rides are still running. The parks are still open. The tickets are still being sold. But the victims of these accidents carry the consequences every single day, and no settlement or apology can give them back what they lost.